San Diegans accomplish great things every day. We care about our neighbors and our community. We are proud of our diversity. We are resilient. We hold our leaders accountable. We live in one of the most dynamic cities in America, the San Diego Union-Tribune, telling San Diego's story for more than 150 years.
Hello, I'm Dr. Gail F. Baker, Vice President and Provost at the University of San Diego.
And I'm Dr. Noelle Norton, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here at USD.
For the second year in a row, USD, along with its College of Arts and Sciences and Humanities Center, is proud to return as the presenting sponsor for the 2021 San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books.
As a university deeply committed to the liberal arts, USD promotes a form of lifelong learning that ignites curiosity, builds critical connections across different ideas and topics by seeing them from unique perspectives.
Our partnership with the Festival of Books enables all of us avid readers to come together as a community alongside renowned authors from all over the world and to dive deeply into imaginative stories and important themes.
Yes, books do have the ability to open minds and hearts. On behalf of the University of San Diego, we thank you for joining us for today's program to explore the world of books with us.
Enjoy the presentation.
Welcome to the San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books. I'm Nina Garin. I'm the editor of Pacific Magazine, and I'm also part of the San Diego Union-Tribune's entertainment team. Today, we're speaking with authors Christina Lauren and Jayne Allen. Christina Lauren is actually Christina Hobbs and Laura Billings, and they have written The Soulmate Equation. And Jayne Allen is author of Black Girls Must Die Exhausted. Welcome to the panel, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Hello. Thank you for having us.
I wanted to start out with talking about pseudonyms. There's 2 books, but there's 3 authors here, so it might be a little confusing. So Christina Lauren, let's start with you and the meaning behind your name.
So I am Christina. It was actually when we first decided to start writing together, I think it was our agent, Holly Root's idea that we just go by one name, and we kind of like toyed with a couple, and it was like Christina Lauren or Lauren Christina, but Lauren Christina sounds a little soap opera-ish. Just because there are some people who don't want to read books that are written by co-authors. They just automatically think they're like disjointed or whatever, but we actually really love it. It gives us like a little bit of separation because like Christina Lauren is one person. It's not us. So there's no ego. Everything we do is for Christina Lauren. But also if you ever hear somebody say something bad about Christina Lauren, you're just like, right, that girl's a mess. Like that doesn't have anything to do with us.
I guess I'll ask Mal about the idea of having 2 authors on the book. I had never heard that people don't like that, but I now that I think about it, I don't have a lot of co-authored books. Why do you co-author books? You tell us. I know you spoke to the book festival about it earlier, but if you could just condense it and explain why you do it together.
So we met in 2009. We actually met at San Diego Comic-Con. And we were both writing fan fiction at the time for fun. And she had a really big story at the time. So I had organized a panel on fan works and fan art. And she came out and we met in person and we just really hit it off. We had a lot of fun. And fan fiction is very collaborative. It's a very communal writing experience. Everybody, for the most part, who is a writer is also a very ravenous reader. And so we'd been enjoying each other's stories and we just said, well, let's just write a little quick short story together. So we did that and it was just a really fun process and our styles meshed really well and we had a lot of fun doing it. We made each other laugh. And then we said, well, let's try and write a book, which is just like such a huge undertaking for somebody you've known for literally 1 month. And it was just serendipitous. Like we ended up really having the best creative experience. Our personalities are a really good blend. So like we've been co-writing for our entire serious writer career. Like, we haven't done any other way of writing except for fic. So I think, we kind of grew up together in that way, and it made the whole process much more organic. Like, I don't know that I would know how to write a book by myself. So I love it. It's like you're doing something with your best friend. You're making somebody else laugh and swoon. And I have an audience of one that I care about, right? So it makes it nice.
Great. And Jayne, you also write under a pseudonym. Can you tell us your other name and why you chose to go the route of a pseudonym?
Sure. My legal name is Janique Seeley, and I came up with a pseudonym. So Black Girls Must Die Exhausted was my first fiction book, my first novel. I did not, to be honest, didn't have the confidence really to put out what I wanted to put out, especially with the title that I had. I was like, oh my gosh, this is provocative. It's an artistic decision. I wasn't comfortable in the space of or familiar with being an artist. And so it was kind of my, like Beyonce says, Sasha Fierce. I needed a Sasha Fierce to do it for me and to like kind of just not have a barrier, because otherwise I think I wouldn't have moved forward. And so having a Jayne Allen, and Jayne Allen is close enough to my name. My middle name is Aline. It's my grandmother's name that I share with her. And to me, it meant fearlessness. She was very fierce and fearless. And so I took the best components and something I could live into and that would allow me to move forward. Is like I call it a permission granting decision to say, okay, if I'm too afraid to do it under my own name, I'll make a name and, one that I can live with and do it that way. And Jayne Allen has the courage to say the things that I don't. So that's good.
Your answer is way cooler.
Are there any other characteristics that Jayne Allen has that maybe you don't?
I think that just the fearlessness, I think in my original career as a lawyer, and there's just a level of being conservative and, measured in what you say that and do that was not really what I wanted to do or be, especially as a writer. And so this just gives me that space, and sort of the two kind of merged over time, and I hope continually so. And, I think there'll always be a Jayne Allen, and I just love what it's allowed me to. I will always have a special place for what it allowed me to do at the beginning. And I think there will always be like kind of this special space that I can inhabit. And it gives you a little bit of separation too. So like if people want to, throw slings and arrows, okay, yeah, that Jayne Allen girl, woo, I love how you guys put it. So it's helpful, especially as an artist. It's helpful.
I agree.
Yeah. Another thing that you all have in common is it seems like you came to writing after having another career. Is that true? And can you maybe discuss what you were doing before and how you took the courage to drop it and become a writer? Because that's a really big step. So let's start with you, Jayne. You mentioned you were a lawyer. So let's talk about that.
Yes. Well, so I think there are a lot of lawyers that have dreams of writing. And I think, Stacey Abrams, she just unmasked herself with her pen name. So I think it's sort of this back of the mind dream, and that we want to be able to channel our writing into something creative. And it takes a lot of courage to be an artist and to put your work out there and your creative offering, and writing is such a collaboration with the reader. So it's very vulnerable. And as a lawyer, that's completely a different, realm of thinking, because you're supposed to know everything and have all the answers. And for me, it never left me. Even in law school, even before that, I would write, I was supposed to be taking notes in class, and I was writing poems and lyrics and anything else. And it just never left me. If I ever had a spare moment, I'd be in meetings sometimes writing out plots or, writing about characters. So I had to pay attention. And if it's something that never leaves, at a certain point, you have to just say, okay, I'm going to do what I can do. And I started taking writing classes and just learning. It took me 12 years. It took me not so long to write the novel, but it took me 12 years to get the courage and learn how to write and build the skill set and learn how to put myself out there. So that was sort of my process. I'm excited to hear Christina Warren's process.
So I had been working, both of us were still working full-time up until we had about 6 books out. I have my doctorate in neuroscience, and I had been working on retinal disease and movement disorder research, and which are totally unrelated, weirdly. And I loved my job. I really loved science. I loved what I did. I loved my boss and my employees. And I sort of had never planned to leave, but it just got to a point with our publishing, which writing had always been like a hobby passion of mine. And so I think when you grow up writing, you have a pretty clear awareness. I think most people do, maybe not everybody, that it's really hard to make money as a writer and that you shouldn't make that your plan A for a living. And so, I had always sort of had that in my head that like I could never really be a writer. I could just do it as a hobby. And then I met Christina and we published, and our first book hit the New York Times list. And then we had sort of 6 books out in a year, and I had little kids and this full-time job. And I had to kind of decide what I was going to do with my time, because everything was getting 10% of me. Nothing was getting 100%. And so I made the decision to leave science, which was hard, but also like kind of a dream because I had loved writing for so long. Actually, my mom just found boxes of my old journals that I used to write romance stories in. She found them this morning, and she said she was just like crying, laughing, because I'm sure they're terrible and I can't wait to read them. But I mean, I've been writing.
They were days of our lives.
Fan fiction. And fan fiction from all kinds of crazy stories. I don't even remember all of them, so it's going to be fun. But anyway, I think, it was like hard to leave, but also great when you get to do your dream for a job. That's pretty awesome.
I was just working in a junior high counseling office, and I had never written anything for fun until I started writing fic. Like that's where I learned how to write. That's where I remember the very first chapter I ever posted, I didn't even get where the quotation marks went right. And readers are more than happy to tell you.
Yes, they are.
And so I could not have done this job without doing that first, because that's where it's where I learned how to write. It's where I learned how to kind of be online and how to take praise and criticism and everything. So yeah, I really missed working with kids. I loved working with teenagers, but I loved doing this more. So I was very lucky to get to do it full time.
What was the first fan fiction you wrote? What inspired you to actually?
I was writing Twilight fan fiction. I had surgery and read the Twilight books and stumbled upon twilighted.net, which was like a fan fiction thing. And I could not believe that there were these women that were writing and reading each other's stories, just writing for fun. And so when I first started writing, I was just like, could not believe that this was a thing I got to do. And that people were going to read anything I wrote. It was like magic to me.
Well, and the funny thing about the fandom, I mean, talk about attorneys. They're like, I swear every other writer in that fandom was an attorney.
Right. Probably.
And it was like every single kind of woman from every place in the world was writing this stuff. And it was just really invigorating to find this community of women being creative for each other and rooting each other on and praising each other and helping each other edit. And it just was, I don't know, it was the most amazing experience. I really, really cannot recommend finding a female-driven fandom enough.
Also, both of your books are very specific, to the point where it's so specific that it becomes universal. And with Soulmate Equation, being from San Diego, you really captured San Diego and made it so specific that I was just in New York and I went to the Strand bookshop there, and it felt weird to see your book there. Like, wait, this book belongs.
It's a West Coast book.
Yeah. And then Jayne, your book is also very specific about lifestyle, and I also worked in TV news, and a lot of that just felt so realistic. And is that a choice that you make to put in details, or how do you weed that out? And tell me about the process of making those stories come alive through details.
Well, for me, I thought that it was really important because it's important to the character. And the main character is kind of who the reader is going to live through. And I really like the idea of creating a story that you can trust and learn about life from, and sort of have this virtual experience that is realistic enough that, you kind of know something about this by the end of the story. And so it was important to me to really add the layers of what Tabitha Walker's day-to-day life would be like. And because it's important to, the story and how it forces her to grow and evolve. And it was also, something that I knew and thought was kind of cool and went to share with readers. So I always say that I kind of have the scrapbook of my life that I use to sew in to my books. And so it was something that I could bring to my reader from my life experience that, could be something to share and make that even more valuable for me. So those were the choices I made. I put what I loved about LA, what I didn't love so much about LA, and some of the things that I knew from exposure, experience, and research.
Yeah. And then before we go to Christina and Lauren, Jayne, I think before we move on to Christina and Lauren, we should just give the audience a little summary of what your book is about. We haven't actually talked about what these books are about. So will you give us a little summary?
And show the cover again, because it's so beautiful.
Oh, thank you. You guys are so supportive. See, this is what I love about having a woman-driven community. We're like so supportive of each other, and I love that. Thank you so much. Well, so Tabitha Walker has also a village and a community of friends, but she's the protagonist of the book. At 33, she's been living this checklist-driven life that seems to be going pretty well. Like, she has an enviable career. She's a reporter in Los Angeles, a junior reporter, but she's doing what she always wanted to do. She's attractive. She has a partner who she wants to be with, and she just thinks her life is just on track. But she has a reproductive health crisis, and it does a few things for her. One of them is a shock moment that awakens her to the word that she's been living in her life, what she's been living into. And I think all of us are sleepwalking a little bit and in little ways. And there's a word that we're living into. And for Tabitha, her word is exhausted. She realizes this in so many ways and so many layers of her life. And so she has to go about living out what her actual real dreams are. The checklist thing is what we think we are supposed to want. And then there's what we really do want in the deepest part of ourselves. And for Tabitha, she really wants to have a family. And it's in part due to a trauma that happened in her family and when she was young, and that is explored in the story. And then also in the background, Tabitha is a Black woman. And so this story unfolds against the backdrop of race as a layer of experience. So you kind of experience this story through the eyes of a woman who is Black in contemporary times, and what that feels like and what layer of experience that adds to the story. And her grandmother happens to be white, and that's her closest family member. So there's the very intimate conversations that happen that explore family and race and womanhood and all of these topics in a very interesting and courageous way. And that's one of the things I love most about the book, is that relationship and the conversations they have. And then there's some other colorful characters. There's Lisa Sinclair, she's more than an ally. She's kind of an accomplice in at the workplace, and some fun Ms. Gretchen, who is an older woman, but who, never bites her tongue. So it's just a kind of realistic story that could happen, but is fiction. And I just, I'm excited to be able to share that with the world.
And you set out to make this a trilogy, correct?
Yes. Yes. It's the first book in a planned trilogy. So Black Girls Must Die Exhausted is the first book. It introduces Tabitha. They operate as kind of standalone books. So, you'll get a satisfactory conclusion with the first book, but you'll be a little mad at me at the end. There's still more to read. But yeah, so I liked the idea of having a trilogy because it gave me space to let these characters breathe, and you get to meet everybody in her life and really get to know them. And I always felt like I would be doing the service to my characters if you were in a room with one of them and you know who it was. That's how I wanted readers to feel.
I love the way you described it too before we started, where we were talking about romance and romantic elements. And you said that there are romantic elements in this book, but your goal was that she gets herself. And I just love that so much. That's such a beautiful way of saying it. So
yeah, thank you. Yeah, I like this idea. I mean, romance is evolving for us. I think you guys do a wonderful job of showing the evolution of how we're living life and all of the layers that we have to factor in also having romantic interests and how that changes how these things unfold. And so, yeah, this story is, I mean, regardless of who she winds up with or not, it is a girl gets herself story. And it was fun to try to craft that. So thank you for that one.
Yeah.
And then Christina and Lauren, the soulmate equation, before we get in further, please give us a little summary of that book.
Sure. So the Soulmate Equation, it's about Jessica Marie Davis. She's our first single mom. Her daughter is a 7-year-old Juno. And Jess is a freelance statistician. She is a young single mother and has sort of compartmentalized her life. She has decided that she is not going to date or kind of put herself back out there until her daughter is in college. And her best friend, Fizzy, is a romance author, and she is having none of this. She thinks that is just total BS. She's not going to, close herself off for the next 11 years. And so Fizzy find out about this new matchmaking company that's about to go public. It's called Genetically, and they do DNA matchmaking. And so Fizzy thinks this is fascinating. She drags Jess along to hear the spiel and to find out what it's about. And Jess is very skeptical and initially not interested. But when she has a really low point after a bad day, she spits into the vial and mails it off and then kind of forgets about it until she gets a notification on her phone that she has matched at an unprecedented level with the founder of the company, who turns out is somebody who comes to her coffee shop every day, and she does not like him. So that's sort of where the story starts. And it was really fun. I mean, we really loved writing the single mom. We loved writing Fizzy. We loved writing Juno. I don't know. It was all like the community and the family was such a big fun part of it. So.
And neither of you live in San Diego, but you seem, the minute I read that they were at Twigs, I was like, is that the same? Wait, because I used to live in that neighborhood. I was like, wait, is there just another coffee shop named Twigs? So how is that? What is your San Diego connection?
Well, so we met in, San Diego, but Lo's family lives in San Diego. And I lived in San Diego when I was like very young. My real dad was in the Navy, and I always joke that I've just been spent the rest of my life trying to get back. But her aunt and uncle live in the building that we actually describe as, because Jess, she lives in this we joke that it's sort of like a little compound. Her grandparents, Nana and Pops, own this apartment building, and then there's a little house, and it's surrounded by this little gate and bougainvillea, and there's like a little Thai restaurant next door, and all of these things. And that's a real apartment building that her aunt and uncle own, and their kids live in the building. And Lo's cousin used to work at Twigs, and so whenever she goes down there all the time, and then whenever I'm there for Comic-Con or something, we go and visit. And it just feels like this little when you're back there, it feels like this little hidden away place. You can hear the restaurant next door, and you can smell it. And the coffee shop is down the street, and everything is sort of just within walking distance, which is sort of what we wanted, that Jess's life feels kind of safe and small and everything she needs is within like arm's reach, everything she thinks that she needs. And so there was an article years ago in, I think, the LA Times or something like that, of her aunt and uncle, but it looks just like we've described and stuff. And Lo can talk about it more if she wants to, but
yeah, I mean, it was just fun to base it on a real place because it felt like a love letter to the closeness of family and also to the location. I love San Diego. I spent a lot of time there. So yeah, it was really fun.
And the Soulmate Equation is a romance book. Is that correct?
It is, yeah.
And I feel like the idea that I at least grew up with romance books was like the Fabio cover at the supermarket. And it was like, no, I'm not going to read that. But then you read your books and they're, very relatable. You don't feel, they're just like a book that has a romance in it. And I wanted us all to kind of talk about that idea of the romance novel evolving into like a more feminine forward space.
For sure. I mean, I think, by definition, the only thing that a romance novel has is a happily ever after. So any book that has a happily ever after could be considered romance. Many books have a happily ever after, but are not genre romance. They're shelved elsewhere in the store. But usually you need the primary arc in the storyline to be the romantic arc, right? And I think, many of us grew up reading romance, and it was this sort of like secret thing that you did and you didn't talk about it. And especially when Kindles came around, like romance exploded because finally women could read, primarily women, I should say, could read as many romance novels as they wanted, and nobody would ever know what they were reading because, society likes to shame women for the things that we like, including loving romance. And so I do think, having those covers, I think, made it harder in some ways to be like, this is who I am. But I think the fact that ebooks came around, that it became this thing that you could do without having to announce to the world anything, you could do sort of without any shame, allowed women to also embrace their love for stories about relationships, about falling in love. And when that community got bigger, we sort of rallied around each other to say, it's okay to love this. We all love this. And then that conversation evolved into like, what does my happily ever after look like? This hero doesn't need to save me. I am fine the way I am. I would like this hero or heroine to add to my life in this way. And I think, because the genre grew so well, we were able to have some really good conversations about what we want it to be. I mean, we get to make this genre whatever we want it to be. As long as we stay within that happily ever after construct, like it can be whatever we want. Everybody deserves a happily ever after, right?
Right.
So.
And Jayne, what is your opinion on romance in books?
Well, I think it's, I think what's exciting about where romance is going is that you're starting to see increasingly complex heroines, so I love that this is a single mom story and she's a scientist. I mean, that's so dope, and the complexities of what people want and what people need and how, and how it's evolving with the complexities of our actual day-to-day experiences. That's what keeps the genre relevant. And I think it evolves beyond, a simple, genre definition. So like you can have a Tabitha Walker story too, where she has a romantic interest, but she also has something that is driving her that is a little bit, grows in importance relative to that romance. So that's something that I think brings more people in and gives them permission to, openly say, yeah, I really love reading this. And yes, I get something out of it. And yes, I enjoy it. So that's my view on that. It's part of life. And I'm glad we can serve people as they grow in that way.
I love that you say that. And I also think just to like amplify that too, because it's such a good point. Romance is a genre that moves really fast in publishing. And so I think by definition and by default, we can be on the front end of change. And so I think, when we're talking about who gets a happily ever after, who gets to be a heroine in a story, you know, those sorts of things. Romance takes those questions and those responsibilities really seriously. And I love that. I love that it's an inclusive genre. I love that we're seeing disability rep. We're seeing authors of color out there publishing it on bestseller lists. Like, you know, you're seeing queer stories in the top 10 of the New York Times. Like, these things are amazing. And I just love that the conversation is, you know, it's just like so vibrant and so many voices contributing to it. So I love it.
I agree. And we're actually getting to the end of our interview, but before we go, I wanted to ask, you all have books, you all go to bookstores. What is your favorite bookstore in the world and why?
Ooh.
In the world.
In the world. That's a good one. I mean, I do love the Strand in New York. I love Tattered Cover in Denver.
Oh, yeah. Mysterious Galaxy in San Diego.
Mysterious Galaxy is great. Yeah.
The Ripped Bodice in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
I love that one. Yeah, I love Mahogany Books. There's so many, but it was fun to do my first book event there, and it was really my first time having the interaction of an indie bookstore as an author, and that moment of connecting with my fans. I'll never forget that I had fans. I was like, oh my gosh,
right?
People like leave their house and come see me. Oh my gosh, you know. So that I will never forget that moment, that first moment. So.
It's amazing.
And now that we're coming out of the pandemic and people are going to actual book readings and bookstores, has been great. But during the pandemic, was it harder to write or easier to write? And that'll be the last question.
I think that we almost have an advantage. We always say being co-authors is sort of our superpower because there are two of us. So even though the pandemic sort of just isolated people, we had each other. And this is sort of how we work anyway. Book signings were different. Book releases were different. And we had 3 books out during the pandemic. So we had to adjust all of that. But it was funny that we would say that everyone else was sort of having to work the way that we do, which is texting, FaceTime, Zoom, all of these things. So for us, the hardest part, I think, was we're used to seeing each other a lot. We're used to doing a lot of events or just going to each other's house. We're sort of spoiled in that way. And also we outline together in person. So even though we work apart, for that part, we're usually together. So that was hard, but I feel like we had each other in ways that maybe other people didn't.
Yeah.
And I guess for me, well, my book is now on pre-sale. So it's out September 28th. So I wasn't writing during the pandemic. I did have editing to do. And that was great because editing's so collaborative. I was working with my editor, Sarah Reed, and that was great to have that interaction actually. And it gave me the opportunity to connect more with book clubs and readers. And so I tried to stay connected in that way. And I actually learned more than I ever imagined talking to readers during the pandemic, because they will let you know, good and bad and otherwise, and also what they want. And so that was an amazing learning experience during the pandemic to have all of those conversations. So I did learn to write even more than I ever imagined during the pandemic, just by talking to readers.
Oh, that's great. Well, hopefully next year we can actually be in person for our book festival. But for now, thank you, Christina and Lauren of the Soulmate Equation and Jayne Allen of Black Girls Must Die Exhausted for being at the San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books.
Thank you, Nina.
Thank you. And you can purchase these books from our indie bookseller partners at bookshop.org or at the link below. And also please consider supporting the San Diego Council on Literacy by visiting literacysandiego.org. And you can continue to join us for a full program of author panels, exciting demonstrations, and live entertainment streamed entirely online. All videos will be available on sdfestivalofbooks.com. Thank you again for joining us. I'm Nina Garin, and we'll see you next year.